Hey, ain't got a sign on the door. Ain't got a sign on the door, ain't got a listing on the block. You find this place the same way. Everybody found this place. Somebody brought you. Somebody vouched for you. Somebody decided you was ready. That's the only map there is. And you either have it or you don't. I walked in the same way, 19 winners back. Raymond put his hand on my shoulder, said nothing, just nodded once. That now was worth more than 1,000 explanations from people who don't know what they talking about. Every city got a version of this. Every version got a different protocol, but the entry is always the same. You don't apply, you get selected, and the selection isn't announced, it's just suddenly true. One Tuesday you're outside, and the next Tuesday you're in, and nobody explains the transition, because the transition is the test. Some cats read it wrong, think it's about flash, think it's about the chain, the car, the corner presence. That ain't the game here, that's the lobby. What's behind the lobby is something else entirely. You gotta know the difference between a man who performs and a man who actually holds something. I learned that the hard way, Tuesday off Western Avenue. Watch the performer get folded in about 30 seconds. Nobody came to help, that's the first lesson. Nobody folds a man who actually holds something, they make space instead. This ain't the life for everyone. That's not an insult, it's just geography. Some people live on the surface, some people live below it, and below it has its own weather, its own calendar, its own law. You follow the surface law when you're on the surface. Down here, different code applies, and the code don't get written down, because writing it down makes it available. And available means diluted, and diluted means it stops working. And this has been working for a long time before you arrive. The only map is knowing, the only knowing is earning, the only earning is surviving long enough to understand what you survive, and telling nobody about it in any detail that could be used as a map by the wrong person. I keep it clean, I keep it professional, not because the law is watching, they always watch, but because the craft demands it. Sloppiness cost you what you built, and what I built took longer than most people's entire careers to get right. Raymond used to say, the minute you get comfortable is the minute you started paying for something you don't know you owe yet. I didn't understand that at 22. I understand it completely at 41. Raymond died on a Thursday. Natural cause at 67 years old. The man held more territory than most politicians, and not a single newspaper covered it. No obituary in any publication, no ceremony that the outside world would recognize. That's the definition of clean power. That's the target I've been shooting at since that first nod on a November night, when he decided I was worth the information of simply knowing that the door existed. The territory has a memory longer than any individual in it. Every person who came through and did it right gets remembered, not in any file, not in any archive, but in the way rooms get quiet when their name gets mentioned. Years after they're gone, that's the ledger this world keeps, and it keeps it accurately. Not because anyone is trying to be fair, but because this world is too small to afford inaccurate records. The only map is no. The only map is no. And knowing ain't given. It's carved out of years that don't make it to the story, out of choices that were never announced, out of rooms that had no witness except the people who mattered. You wanna know where the door is? Earn the right to ask someone who already went through it. That's the only answer I got, and it's the only answer anyone gave me. And you go. The basement don't advertise. The basement don't have a sign. The basement doesn't need you to know it's there. The basement has been full every second Friday since 1996, and never once posted a flyer. Memphis bouncers born in basements like this one, not perform born. The distinction matters because performance is for audiences, and what happens down here doesn't have an audience. They came looking for a show. It has a gathering of people who came knowing that the show is them, is us. It's this specific combination of people who are all told separately by different people on different days that tonight was tonight, and this was where tonight was. Come down the stairs, and the first thing that hits you before the sound even registers is the air. The air down here is different. The air holds what happened here on the previous 30 Fridays. The air is layered with all of those Fridays simultaneously, and you breathe the whole history of the basement. In the first breath at the bottom of the stairs. In the history of the basement is 30 years of people who found the address by being the kind of people who find addresses like this. The bass in the basement is not the same as the bass outside. Outside, the bass dissipates, it goes somewhere else. In the basement, the bass has nowhere to go. It bounces off every wall and comes back and bounces off you and goes again. And the people who've been bouncing bass in basement spaces since the mid-90s know this specific frequency that turns a basement into a body. That's the only way to describe it. When the bass gets it right in here, this space becomes one body. And you feel it in your chest before you feel it in your ears. Memphis bounce in the basement. Memphis bounce in the basement. This ain't what's on the radio, this ain't what's on the stream. This is the third generation of something that never needed to be recorded to survive. Because the recording is in the people who were there. And the people who were there by someone the following Friday who was worthy of the frequency. And the frequency continues in that transmission, not in any digital archive. Cousin Jerome is working the organ stab tonight. Jerome found that organ at a church sale in 2007 and has been running it through a specific effects chain since 2009. And the combination is something that cannot be replicated outside of Jerome's specific hands. Jerome's organ stab is the sound of this specific basement, and the sound of this basement is the sound of this particular Memphis that doesn't exist in the city's official self-description. Memphis bounce in the basement. Memphis bounce in the basement. You got the address from someone who got it from someone who was told it by someone who's been here since the beginning. And the chain of transmission is unbroken, and every link in the chain knew that the only way to keep the address reliable was to only give it to people who understood that the address was a responsibility, not a prize. Come down the stairs, feel the air hold you, feel the bass recognize you, and you'll understand why 30 years of Second Fridays never needed a fly. No introduction required. By the time I walk in, the room already knows what walked in and adjusts accordingly. That's not arrogance. That's just what 23 years of building looks like when it walks through a door. Arrogance doesn't know the rooms it shouldn't be in. I know every room I shouldn't be in, and I'm not in any of them. I've been from Figueroa to Florence to Century Boulevard. Every intersection knows my rate of operation. Every man who matters in these blocks has either worked with me directly or worked with someone who worked with me and got the report secondhand, which is accurate enough because the report has been accurate for 2 decades. And the accuracy of the report over time is the introduction that precedes me everywhere I go. No introduction required. No introduction required. No introduction required. The word was already here before I was. The name does the arriving first. I just confirm what the room already suspected. Some men need to tell you who they are. Those men are still building. When you're done building, the testimony is in the architecture. Every person in this room is standing in it right now. Every arrangement that got honored, every situation that got managed without escalation. Every time the word was kept when keeping it cost something real. That's the foundation. And the foundation speaks louder than any introduction I could give myself. An introduction I gave myself would undercut what other people's experience of me is already established. And I spent too long building that experience to undermine it with a business card. I remember when I needed the introduction, 1998, new to the protocol, new to the weight of it. Had to have someone speak for me in every room, had to prove the voucher wasn't wasted on me. Every man who makes it through the proven period knows exactly how heavy those rooms were. When you hadn't earned the right to enter them quietly yet, I sat at the edge of those rooms and watched and said almost nothing for 3 years. And the 3 years of sitting at the edge is what earned the center seat I've been in since. Now quiet is my loudest statement. I walk in, I sit, I wait, and the room reorganizes itself around that waiting because they know that I waited long enough that what I'm waiting for now is worth the room's patience. The room gives me that patience. Not because of the coat I'm wearing, not because of anything I said in the last 5 minutes, but because of 23 years of showing up the same way in every room. And the room has a memory longer than any individual conversation.
No introduction required.
No introduction required.
No introduction required.
Hey, that's the man in the back, what he thinks I came for. He already knows, because I told him with my presence 6 weeks ago in a different room in a different city. And presence is consistent across territory. That's how you know a man is real. Same weight, same measure, same standard, regardless of what city he's standing in. The man who changes his behavior based on the room is the man whose report can't be trusted, because the report depends on which room you caught him in. My report is the same from Los Angeles to Memphis to Chicago, and that consistency is the only introduction that can't be fabricated. This ain't about pride, I got past pride in the second decade. This is about the craft being undeniable. When the craft is undeniable, the room knows it before the handshake. And after the handshake, everything is already decided. The handshake is just ceremony. The ceremony acknowledges what was already true. I built this the way concrete is laid, one pour at a time, one layer curing before the next gets added. And what got built is not coming down, cause what got built was built right from the foundation level before anybody was watching, before anybody thought it was worth watching, before I had any reason to believe it would ever be worth watching, except that the craft demanded it be done correctly, regardless of who was observing. No introduction required. Not on this coast, not in this world, not in this lifetime. Come correct or don't come at all. The territory doesn't owe anyone an orientation. You were supposed to know the orientation before you decided to arrive. And if you didn't know it, that's information the territory needed about you. And the territory is filed it accordingly. And the ledger that doesn't get corrected. After hours, before evidence. That's the name for the space we operate in. Not a club, not a crew, not an organization. A space. The space between midnight and when the record begins. And what happens in that space is the most honest thing we do, because there's no record of it, so there's no performance for the record. What we built here wasn't built for recognition. Recognition would have destroyed it. The things that survive in this world are the things that don't require the world to confirm their existence. They exist because the people inside them know they exist, and the people outside them don't know what to look for. I have been in after hours rooms on 3 coasts, and the rooms are different, and the people are different, and the protocols are different, but the principle is always the same. What happens after hours exists before evidence. And what exists before evidence is the only version of anything that's completely true, because evidence is selection. Somebody decided what to keep. After hours is everything. Nobody decided anything. It just happened. And the people who were there carry it in themselves instead of in any file. After hours, before evidence. Victoria is still at the house in Ladera, and the amber light is still on, and Edgar is still in the kitchen on Friday nights, and the basin still doesn't know what decisions get made while looking down at the basin from that room. Uncle Ray's barbershop on Greenbrier still has a back room, and the back room still has a door to the parking lot, and the parking lot still has Tuesdays, and the Tuesdays still have conversations that Uncle Ray started in 1994 that continue past Uncle Ray, and people Uncle Ray trusted. Cousin Jerome is still on Jackson Avenue, second Tuesday of every month, with 3 phones in the basement that has been full since 1996 and will be full after all of us have moved on, because the basement doesn't need any one of us. The basement needs the principal, and the principal survives whoever was carrying it. After hours, before evidence. This is the report that cannot be filed from a world that does not file reports, written by a narrator who understood before he understood it consciously, that the most important things in any life are the things that happened in the space that no record could contain. Beaumont built something that survived. Beaumont Devante moved information that nobody else could move. Miss Celestine watches what nobody else watches. Edgar cooks for a room that nobody else feeds. Jerome holds what Jerome holds. And the holding continues after hours. The city is honest. The city doesn't need to be the version of itself that it performs for the people who visit it. After hours, the city is just the city, sitting in the dark with the people who chose to stay. Past the hours, the rest of the world considers acceptable. Before evidence, before anyone decided what to keep and what to discard. Before the morning came and made selections from what the night produced everything. And we were in it, and we chose to be in it. And the choosing is the whole story. After hours, before evidence, that's where we live. That's always been where we live. And the amber light in Ladera confirms it for anyone who needs confirmation, who already knows where to look for the light. After hours,
Memphis keeps no ledger. Memphis keeps no ledger. Memphis keeps no ledger. What happens at the junction of Beale in the dark don't get submitted anywhere, and hasn't been submitted in any year that anyone in this room has been alive. I came up in the shadow of a building that the city forgot to demolish, and the building knew my name before the city did. That's how it works here. The unofficial has its own infrastructure, and the infrastructure is older than what got built over it. They paved over the original streets in 1962. The original streets kept their names underneath the asphalt. Everything in Memphis has a version of itself that predates the version you can look up. Miss Dorothy still sits on Madison Avenue, watches everything, says nothing to outsiders. 3 generations of a family watched this corner breathing. Not one of them ever filed a report, because there is no form for what they saw. The form would have to admit the form doesn't reach here. Miss Dorothy has a mind like a court reporter for a court that doesn't have a building. She knows which cars belong and which cars are looking. She knows the difference between passing through and arriving, and she decides which category you fall into before you finish parking. Memphis keeps no ledger. Memphis keeps no ledger.
The dark does the bookkeeping, and the dark don't share its accounts with anyone who asks directly. You have to have been there long enough that the dark decides you already know.
I knew a man called the deacon, not because he was religious, but because he presided over things. Every Wednesday evening off Winchester he held court. No gavels, no robes, no witnesses that would talk. Just men who understood that his word was the closest thing to law that mattered in those blocks. The deacon got old, passed the knowledge sideways to 3 people, not his sons. 3 people, because sons inherit obligation, but the right people inherit understanding, and understanding in Memphis is geological. It sinks into you over years, not days. You don't learn this city, the city learns you. And if the city decides to trust what it learned, you stay. If it doesn't, you eventually leave one way or another. There is a difference between those 2 exits. Down here the Gothic isn't aesthetic, it's the actual architecture. The old buildings on South Main that lean into each other like they're sharing secrets against the wind. The basements that existed before the basements got recorded in the county's paper trail. 1947, before they started keeping those papers, what lived in those basements survived past the paperwork, survived past the people who thought paperwork was enough to erase it. The city tried 4 different times since 1960 to redevelop this corridor. 4 times the corridor politely waited out the redevelopment and returned to what it was before the blueprints arrived. Memphis keeps no ledger. Memphis keeps no ledger. You think the city forgot? The city didn't forget. The city never knew. The city was never the authority here. The authority was always below the city, operating in the space. The city didn't think to regulate, because the city didn't know the space existed. By the time the sun hits the Mud Island Bridge, everything that needed to happen already happened in the dark before the sunrise. You was asleep when the transfers were made. You was asleep when the handshakes occurred. You was asleep when the next chapter got decided. Then woke up, wonder why things feel different without knowing exactly what shifted. That's the point, that's always been the point. The darkness is operational, the darkness is staff. The darkness has a philosophy that predates every policy that tried to manage it and will outlast every policy currently trying.
Memphis keeps no ledger,
And the ledger you think you're reading is the cover story, written for people who weren't supposed to find the door and won't find it. No matter how many times they read the ledger, they think they have.
Ladera lights never off. Ladera lights never off. You drive up those hills at any hour, and the house with the amber light in the window has been on since before you arrive, and will still be on after you leave. Ladera lights. The house doesn't have a street number visible from the road, not because it was removed, it was never installed. The people who need to find this house don't use the number to find it. They use everything else. The turn after the eucalyptus, the mailbox with no flag, the driveway that looks unpaved, but it's the people who need to find it know the landmarks in the order they appear without consulting anything, because the sequence was told to them once verbally, and they remembered it because they understood that what gets told once without being written down is the most valuable information in any world. This house has a room at the back with a view of the basin when the smog clears, and on the nights when the smog clears in January, you can see from downtown to the ocean from that room. And the men in that room have been making decisions that affect the basin they're looking at for the last 2.5 decades, without the basin knowing the decisions were being made. From where? Ladera lights never off. Ladera light never off. The amber in the window is the signal, the only signal. And if you're asking what the signal means, you were never supposed to see the window. I sat in that room for the first time in 2001, courtesy of a woman named Victoria, who I'd spent 2 years making myself useful to without asking for anything in return. And 2 years of usefulness without asking is the currency that buys you into rooms like this. Victoria didn't explain the room before we arrived. She explained it once inside afterward, and the explanation was, remember this view, because this view is the measure of everything we're trying to protect down there. The house has a kitchen that operates between midnight and 4. Not a cater kitchen, a real kitchen operated by a man named Edgar, who has cooked in this kitchen every Friday night since 1998. And Edgar's cooking is not the point of the room, but the room has never been the same on nights Edgar isn't there, which is why Edgar hasn't missed a Friday in 26 years. Loyalty to a kitchen is loyalty to what the kitchen serves, and Edgar understood that before the first Friday. Ladera lights never off, because the conversation that started before you arrived doesn't stop because you left, and the conversation that will continue after you've gone home requires the light to stay on for the people still arriving. And in this world, somebody's always still arriving at any hour, on any night, that the amber light says the conversation is happening. The lights went off once, power outage 2019, and Edgar lit candles on every surface in the kitchen. And the room continued by candlelight until 3 in the morning when the power came back. And then the amber light went back on, and nobody left because the light's going off. Didn't change what the room was for. Ladera lights, Ladera lights.
before your grandfather was born, and it will be here after every name currently attached to it gets retired voluntarily or otherwise. That's the first article of the Beale Street Doctrine, and the first article is the only one you really need to understand the rest. Article 1, the territory outlives the operator. The operator is temporary, the
territory is permanent, act accordingly. I have watched men refuse this article for decades. I have watched what happens when they refuse it. The territory does not argue with the refusal. The territory simply continues. And the man who refused eventually stops. And the territory continues without him, exactly as it continued before him. Beale Street Doctrine.
Beale Street Doctrine.
Older than the stones that paved it, older than the music that made outsiders think. They understood what this street was about. Beale Street Doctrine.
Beale Street Doctrine.
The tourists see the neon, the initiated see the infrastructure beneath the neon that the neon was built to cover. Two cities occupying the same geography. One city for the visitors, one city for the people who never needed to visit. I learned Article 2 from a man named Calvin, who ran 3 blocks off Beale for 16 years without incident. Not because he was lucky, but because he understood that the doctrine demands tribute, not financial tribute. The doctrine has no bank account. Tribute of respect, tribute of adherence, tribute of not overstepping the exact borders that the doctrine drew before you arrived and withdraw. After you're gone, Calvin knew the borders the way a man knows his own property line. Not by looking it up, I haven't walked it thousands of times until it lived in his body, until the knowledge of where the line was became reflexive rather than conscious. Calvin never overstepped. That's why Calvin died old, in the house in a bed surrounded by people who knew what he was. That's the best ending this world offers, and it's rarer than diamonds, and it requires perfect adherence to every article every single time without exception, because the doctrine doesn't forgive selective compliance. You can't follow the doctrine on Tuesdays and Thursdays and take a break from it on the weekends. The doctrine is not a diet plan, it's the operating system, and operating systems don't have weekends. Beale Street Doctrine.
Beale Street Doctrine.
You either know it from the ground up, or you don't know it at all.
But there's no partial credit.
Beale Street Doctrine.
Beale Street Doctrine.
The partial credit men are the ones to explain things after the fact, from a position they no longer hold. I have met many partial credit men, and they all sound the same. They speak with authority about a system that is no longer patient with them, and the system just keeps running in rooms they're no longer invited to. I've watched men try to import doctrine from other cities, thinking their city's weight translates here. It doesn't. It never has. The Beale Street Doctrine is not portable. It is geological. It grew from this specific soil, from these specific rivers, from these specific generations of people who decided that the unofficial were the standards higher than the official, because the official never had standards worth holding. The official changes with every election cycle. The doctrine has not changed in the time that anyone currently in this conversation has been alive. The Gothic in this gospel is not decoration, it is the entire point. Gothic means the darkness has a structure. Gothic means what operates in shadow, operates by rules more strict than what operates in light, because in shadow the only discipline is self-discipline. No external auditor, no oversight committee, just the doctrine and your adherence to it, and the consequence when you don't. And the consequence doesn't arrive with an explanation, it just arrives the same way the Gothic Appointment always arrives, already decided, just not yet delivered. Beale Street Doctrine.
Beale Street Doctrine.
It doesn't need your acknowledgement to function. It has been functioning without your acknowledgement your entire life, and then some. Beale Street Doctrine.
Beale Street Doctrine.
You walk on the street and feel something you can't name. Something has a name. You just haven't earned the introduction yet, and the street is in no hurry to make it. The street has been introducing itself to people for longer than the city has had a name for it, and it will continue that introduction long past the last person currently standing on it. The doctrine survives the men who carry it.
The doctrine will survive you,
and when you're ready to understand that completely,
without reservation,
without negotiation,
without looking for the exception that applies to you
specifically,
then you're ready to be part of what never gets written down.
Before the roosters know the sun is coming, there's a specific hour that belongs to nobody official. the hour between the last of the night people and the first of the morning people. And in that hour the world runs on a completely different operating system. Not criminal, not legal. Something older than both categories. Something that predates the categories. In Houston it's called the slow hour. Different people call it different things in different cities. But every city that has a version of this world has a name for the hour before the roosters know. Because the hour for the roosters know is when things get resolved that can't be resolved in the presence of witnesses who would tell it wrong. I said in more slow hours than I can count. And what the slow hour teaches you over time is that most of the weight you've been carrying doesn't weigh what you thought in the noise of the operating world amplifies everything, including the things that don't deserve amplification. And the slow hour strips the amplification out, and what's left is the actual weight of the actual thing. And the actual weight is usually manageable in a way the amplified version never was. Bowman used to say, resolve it in the slow hour, carry it forever. And Bowman was right. Bowman was always right about the things that required patience to understand. And I understand now what Bowman meant. The slow hour is not a deadline for resolution. It's the optimal climate for resolution. Because the people in the slow hour are tired in the right way, tired enough that the performances drop and the actual person is present, and actual people can actually resolve things in ways that performances of people cannot. Before the roosters know, before the roosters know, everything that needed to be said got said. In the darkness before the light will find a resolved situation. And think the resolution was natural. The light doesn't know about the slow hour. The light has never been present in the slow hour, because light is what ends it. Uncle Ray's slow hour was the half hour before he closed the barbershop. When the last client was gone and the broom was in the corner, and Uncle Ray would sit in his own chair and be still. And whatever needed to resolve, and Uncle Ray resolving that stillness between 9:30 and 10. And I know this because I watched it for years before I understood what I was watching. I thought Uncle Ray was tired, Uncle Ray was working in the only hour that does that kind of work. Before the roosters know, the city belongs to the people who understand that belonging to the city isn't about being visible in it. It's about being present in the hours when the city is most itself and the city is most itself. Before the roosters know, before the city has to become what other people need the city to be. In the hours that they occupy, in the slow hour, the city is just a city, sitting with itself and the people who know how to sit with the city while it sits with itself. Are the people the city trusts with what it actually is. Before the roosters know, I sit in what Uncle Ray taught me to sit in, and the weight settles into its actual mass. And the morning hasn't happened yet, and the night is finally done, and the slow hour holds everything until it's ready to be held differently.
The doorman doesn't stand at the door. The doorman is the door. Everything that passes through it gets rated in the time it takes to make eye contact, and he decides in that same window whether the night continues or it doesn't. I've seen men with correct clothes, correct car, correct everything stand at that door and get turned. Not because they did something wrong in the moment, but because something in the moment confirmed what someone had already suspected. And the door doesn't argue with suspicion at 2 a.m. The door acts on what it reads. What the doorman reads. How you hold yourself when nobody's told you to hold yourself a certain way. How you look at the building before you approach it. Whether you look, that tells everything. The men who belong here already know what's in the building. They're not curious about the exterior. They already know what's inside, so they don't look at it. They move toward it with the certainty of someone who is going somewhere they've been before. I went through this door for the first time courtesy of a man named Devontae, who owed me 3 favors and decided this was the appropriate currency. Devontae didn't explain the door, he just stood next to me. And the doorman read Devontae and read me. In proximity to Devontae and made a calculation, and the calculation was favorable. That's how it works the first time. You get borrowed credibility and you spend the rest of your relationship with this world building your own.
What the doorman reads,
the way you speak to your driver when you get out of the car, the amount of care you take crossing the lot, whether you step around the crack in the concrete or step on it. Small thing, significant information. The patience in your walk. Are you arriving or performing arrival? There is a difference, and the door sees it every night. Ladera Heights operates on a specific frequency, not just any West Coast frequency, a specific one. The houses up here have views and they hold them. Like the city is something that happens to other people. From up here, you watch the grid of lights below, and the grid doesn't know you're watching. That's the position this world operates from. Not above the city, in superiority, above it in vantage point, which is different.
what the doorman reads,
Is whether you understand the difference, whether you carry the vantage point in your posture without performing it. The performance is what gets turned away. The reality is what gets waved through. And the doorman has been reading this difference every night for 16 years without once getting it wrong in a way that mattered. I got read right on the first night, not because of anything I did consciously, but because Devontae had done what Devontae does, which is put people in positions where their natural behavior is visible. And my natural behavior at a door I'd never stood at before was the same as my natural behavior everywhere. And that consistency is what the doorman is looking for.
what the doorman reads.
Whether you're the same person in all your contexts, or whether the person standing at this door is a character being performed for this specific occasion. If it's a performance, the door knows. The door has seen the performance before, and the performance always has a tell, and the tell always shows up in the first 3 seconds, but before the performer has time to manage it.
I drove down Crenshaw on a Tuesday in October. Watched everything the way the Memphis eye watches. Slow, reading the weather between people, not the people themselves. Memphis trains you to read conditions, not faces, because conditions are what actually move. Faces are just what conditions wear for the day. They move different now west, I give them that. The confidence carries different weight on that coast, like the sun stays out longer, so everything gets to be more visible for more hours of the day. Back home, the dark is the operating system. Out here, the sun is the operating system, but the business is the same business. Underneath it, same transactions, different light temperatures, same protocols, different entry language. I had to learn it the hard way. Spent 3 weeks reading the wrong signals before the frequency started making sense. What Crenshaw doesn't explain
Is what happens after the boulevard goes quiet.
What Crenshaw doesn't explain
Is the door that the boulevard pretends isn't there. You see the surface, the cars, the posture, the acknowledgement. What you don't see is the architecture that holds all that up. And I'm from a place where architecture is all we got, so I know how to read it even in foreign territory. I can tell when the block is working and when it's performing. And Crenshaw at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday was clearly working. Not for the people I can see, for the people I couldn't.
I sat with a man named Winston in the parking structure off Florence, 3 levels up. 2 a.m, nobody around, and Winston talked for 40 minutes without saying anything that could be used against him. That's fluency in a language most people don't study, the language of the unsaid, the sentence that ends before the incriminating word. The ellipsis that does the work of the whole paragraph. I recognized it immediately because we speak the same language in Memphis, different dialects, same grammar. The grammar of a man who've learned that the most valuable thing you can say is the thing you choose not to finish. What Crenshaw doesn't explain is what Winston knew before he knew me. Is who vouched for the voucher, who set up the meeting. The chain of trust goes back further than anyone sitting at the table. Winston knew my mentor's mentor, which means by the time we sat in that parking structure, I had already been pre-approved by a chain that neither of us built and both of us inherited. That's the invisible infrastructure of this world. Not who you know, but who knew who before you arrived. Back in Memphis, we blew it through
through attrition. You survive long enough, you get recognized by the surviving. Out here is different. Out here they watch how you carry yourself before they ever check your references. The posture is the reference, the walk is the reference. How you hold silence in a room full of strangers is the reference. I sat in Winston's car for 20 minutes before either of us said a word. And I understand now that those 20 minutes were the interview. The words after were just confirmation of the result. What Crenshaw doesn't explain is that the codes don't translate, they only coexist. Two systems parallel, never identical. What works in one city will get you paused in another until you prove you understand the distinction. And the distinction is the whole test. I passed the test by not trying to explain my city's way. I passed by sitting quietly in the parking structure at the frequency of someone who knows that silence in an unfamiliar territory is the correct response. The dark that I carry from Memphis is a different shade than the dark that runs west. Both the real, both the operational, but they came from different geology, different histories of what the soil holds, and soil memory is longer than any individual career, longer than any protocol currently in use. The soil holds everything that was done here before anyone thought to document what was being done. What Crenshaw doesn't explain, neither does Beale Street. You have to be on both of them in the dark without a map before the explanation finds you. And the explanation doesn't come all at once. It comes in pieces, over years, in parking structures at 2 A.M. with men who never say the incriminating word.
The boulevard is not empty at 3. Empty is the wrong word. 3 A.M. on Crenshaw is selective. It's occupied by the people who have reasons to be here at this hour, and reasons to be on Crenshaw at 3 are not the reasons that get explained to the morning. I have driven this boulevard at 3 on too many occasions to count them accurately. And what I know about Crenshaw at 3 with no witnesses is that the witnesses are everywhere. They're just not the witnesses you'd call if you were trying to establish a record of what happened. They're the witnesses who saw it and filed it. And the only ledger that matters in this world, the one that can't be subpoenaed.
Devontae called me at
2:47 A.M. on a Thursday in October. Not to threaten, not to posture, to inform. Devontae had information that affected decisions, that affected people, that affected operations. And Devontae understood that some information doesn't travel through daylight. Not because it's shameful, because daylight has too many ears. Ears that don't understand context. Ears that will build the wrong story from correct facts.
Crenshaw at 3 with no witnesses.
Devontae met me at the intersection of Crenshaw and Slauson, and we talked for 11 minutes in 2 separate cars, both facing the same direction with the windows down. Not because 11 minutes is the exact right amount of time, but because 11 minutes was when the information was complete, and complete information requires nothing additional. And Devontae was always economical with his time, because economy of time is economy of exposure, and exposure at 3 A.M. on Crenshaw, even with no witnesses, is still risk, and risk gets managed, not ignored. What gets decided on this boulevard at this hour doesn't get announced in any format that the people who weren't there could access. The decision was made, the decision holds. And the next morning, Crenshaw is Crenshaw at 9, and nobody on that sidewalk at 9 knows that the sidewalk holds the weight of what was decided on it at 3.
That's the art of it, that's the whole art.
The decision has to be invisible to daylight for it to be worth making in the dark. And I've made enough decisions in the dark to know that the visible version of this world is operating on a story that the invisible version decided for years ago at intersections at 3 A.M. with no witnesses that would talk about it to anyone who asked.
Crenshaw at 3 with no witnesses.
Crenshaw at 3 with no witnesses. Devontae's last communication on that third phone of his came through at 3:12 A.M. on a Saturday in 2022. And after that, The third phone went silent, and Crenshaw at 3. It's still Crenshaw at 3, and the decisions still get made, and the witnesses still don't talk, and the sidewalk still holds what the morning doesn't know was placed there. Come correct or don't come. The boulevard knows the difference at 3, but the boulevard is always known the difference, and the difference is everything. The boulevard. Boulevard.
What the territory keeps, it keeps permanently. What the territory keeps doesn't appear in any registry you have access to, and has never appeared in any registry that any authority in this city has had access to. The registry is the territory itself, and the territory is not filing anything on behalf of anyone's curiosity.
I've been on both ends of this equation, the person learning the territory and the territory learning me.
And I tell you from both positions, the territory is the better student. It retains everything, every name, every arrangement, every Wednesday that changed what Thursday looked like. Every man who walked through a door and didn't walk back out the same. The territory holds all of this without effort, without archive, without intent. The way soil holds everything, it falls into it and stays.
Miss Dorothy is still on Madison Avenue, still watching, still saying nothing to anyone who isn't supposed to know.
And she'll be on that corner after I'm not anywhere anymore, and what she knows will transfer.
It always transfers, not in writing, not in recording, but in a way it's always transferred in this city from one person to another in a room with the door closed, which is how everything that matters is always traveled in Memphis. Miss Dorothy is not keeping records, Miss Dorothy is the record,
and the record will find somewhere new to live when the time comes for it to move, the same way it is always found somewhere new to live when the previous keeper could no longer keep.
What the territory keeps,
The territory keeps past the people who brought it there.
what the territory keeps,
Outlast every version of every story that ever tried to explain it from the outside.
The only map is knowing it. I said that at the beginning and I'll say it at the end, because nothing changed in that regard. If anything, the map got more specific, not more detailed. More specific, there's a difference. Detail means more information. Specific means understanding which information actually matters and letting the rest be background noise. I've learned over 2 decades to be extremely specific about what I pay attention to, because you only have so much attention, and this world has a way of giving you more information than you can use as a way of obscuring the information you actually need. What we built in this world won't make a museum, won't make a monument. The monument is the absence of consequence for how we operated. The monument is the longevity. The monument is every man who made it to old age with his word intact and his territory respected. In a world where neither is guaranteed past any given Wednesday, I think about Raymond most of all. Not because Raymond was the greatest man I knew, but because Raymond made it to 67 in a world that was trying to collect from the time he was 21. And Raymond paid everything the world asked for except his word, and his word was never collected, which is the best victory this world allows. The Gothic Appointment comes for everyone eventually. I made my peace with that, I said that already. What I haven't said is what peace actually feels like after you've been inside this world long enough to see what the permanent and the temporary separate. Peace feels like not having to announce yourself in the rooms that matter. Peace feels like the territory knowing your rate of operation without you having to recalibrate every time you enter. Peace feels like Raymond's nod from 1998 finally making complete sense 23 years after the night he gave it. I didn't understand the nod that night. I thought it meant welcome. It meant something more specific than that. It meant I've watched enough of you to know what you're gonna become, and I'm confirming it before you become it, so that you'll know when you do become it that someone saw it coming and thought it was worth the confirmation.
What the territory keeps
is the memory of every person who honored the code.
What the territory keeps
is the record that no filing system can touch.
what the territory keeps.
It's the only legend that matters in this world.
Memphis keeps its legend.
It was never in writing.
It was always in the walls.
In the wood grain of the floors on Poplar Avenue. In the corners where Miss Dorothy watches. In the silences between the words of men
Who learn that silence is the primary language here.
The only map is knowing.
And no one ain't given, it's carved.
Out of years that don't make it to the story.
Out of rooms that don't make it to the record.
Out of choices
that don't make it to the announcement.
But they made it here.
They always make it here.
To the place where the territory keeps what it keeps.
And the rest is just sound.
Moving through air.
That was never gonna hold it.
Jackson Avenue, no number, no number, no number. That's the address. Jackson Avenue, no number. If you have to look it up, you don't have the address. The building has been there since 1987. Back when the neighborhood was different and the building wasn't yet what it would become. It was a dry goods storage until 89. And after 89, it became what it became. And what it became is the thing we're talking about now, without using a name for it. Because the name is only shared in the room itself. And nobody from outside the room has ever been in a position to share it anywhere else. Memphis runs on information asymmetry. What you know versus what you don't is the entire game. The basement on Jackson Avenue exists in the gap between what the city knows and what the city doesn't know to ask about. The health department inspected the building in 2003 and inspected the ground floor, left satisfied because the ground floor is a remarkably clean storage space and has been for 37 years. Whatever is beneath the ground floor didn't come up in conversation because the conversation wasn't asked in the right way. And in Memphis, the question you don't ask is often more powerful than the one you do. Jackson Avenue, no number. The ones who know it feel the address before they arrive. The corner of that block has a specific quality on certain nights, like the air pressure. It's slightly different, like the street is holding its breath. The people in the know feel it when they turn on to Jackson, and they know before they park whether tonight is a night or not. Cousin Jerome manages the basement from the second Tuesday of every month. Jerome doesn't manage it the other Tuesdays because Jerome isn't there, and the other Tuesdays Jerome is wherever Jerome goes. When the world Jerome manages needs him somewhere else, Jerome is 3 phones. The third one has no service plan. It only receives and only from 6 specific numbers. And those 6 numbers are the architecture of what Jackson Avenue is in the months between inspections. Bounce is a state of mind before it's a sound. The sound comes from the state of mind, and the state of mind on Jackson Avenue from 1 A.M. on is we made something here that nobody told us to make, and we protected it because the things were protecting all the things that would get taken if they were visible. So we made it invisible by making it local, and local means you have to already be from here to know where here is. Jackson Avenue, no number. Jackson Avenue, no number. 37 years of Tuesdays, not one in any record. That's the achievement, not what happened down there. But that what happened down there has no address in any system except the one that lives in the people who were there. By the time you shake my hand, the decision was already made 3 weeks ago. And the conversation you wasn't part of, between people you ain't met yet. That's not a power move, that's just how this runs. Ain't nothing personal in the vetting process, but everything is personal in the result. If you passed, you got passed. If you ain't, you never know what test you failed, because the test didn't look like a test. The test looked like a Thursday lunch. The test looked like a casual question about someone you both know. The test looked like how you handled a piece of information that got dropped in the room where you happened to be standing. And you either proved you could hold information or you didn't, and neither outcome was announced. Chosen before the handshake, chosen before you knew there was a door, chosen before the door opened, or you weren't, and either way, that's permanent. The people who make it to the handshake already cleared everything that mattered. The handshake is just acknowledgement of what was already decided.
I watched Reginald work the system for 20 years. Never renounced himself, never broadcasted his credentials. Walked into every room like he'd been there before, because in a real sense, he'd already been vetted in every room before he physically entered it. That's the difference between a man with infrastructure and a man still building his name. Reginald never needed the introduction. The introduction always came before he arrived, carried by people he'd never be in the same room with. People who said Reginald's coming in a certain tone, and the room prepared accordingly. The vetting doesn't happen at meetings. Meetings are for people who already clear vetting. The vetting happens at the periphery, at the edges of other situations. Someone watches how you handle pressure you didn't know was applied. Someone reports back on what you said when you thought the person you said it to was just conversation. No conversation in this world is just conversation. Every conversation is a deposition, and you're always on the record, even in rooms where there's no formal record being kept. Chosen before the handshake. Chosen before the handshake. The interview happened in moments you didn't mark as interviews. The audition was every interaction you thought was casual. Every time you were tired and still stayed professional. Every time you were frustrated and still held the standard. Every time you knew something and chose the right amount of silence. Those moments were the application, and someone was grading them who you never knew was watching. I don't take meetings with men I haven't already studied. I don't extend invitations to people I haven't already observed. 3 separate contexts minimum, that's my personal standard. Most people consider that excessive. Most people operate on a 2-context vetting system, and most people eventually face consequences for the person they fast track through a 2-context system, because 2 contexts can be prepared for 3 separate contexts, especially unexpected ones. Context 3 is where the performance breaks down and the actual person shows up. And you need to know the actual person before you bring them anywhere close to anything real. Out here, the reputation economy is the only economy that matters. Your credit score is what 3 different people in 3 different cities say about you when you're not in the room. And if those 3 reports don't align, then none of the 3 reports are usable, because something in your presentation is inconsistent, and inconsistency in this world is the most dangerous quality you can bring to a table. Inconsistency means you're managing impressions, which means you know your actual behavior won't hold up. And this world has been identifying that gap since before you entered it. Chosen before the handshake. Chosen before the handshake. I ain't trying to intimidate, I'm trying to explain the architecture, so you understand why everything seems casual until it isn't. Why a Tuesday afternoon cup of coffee can determine the next 5 years of your position in this world. Why the man who pours the coffee matters as much as the man who ordered it. Because the man who pours it sees everything at table level, and his report carries weight in rooms you don't know exist. The man who seems like he's not watching is the man who's been watching the longest. The woman who seems like a friendly face knows more about you than your closest associate. That's not paranoia, that's just how professional intelligence works in an industry that never signed a non-disclosure agreement and doesn't need to, because silence is the agreement. And silence here is not the absence of communication, it's the primary mode of it. Chosen before the handshake. And once you understand that, you start conducting yourself accordingly in every room, because every room is the interview. Even the rooms where nobody mentioned an interview, especially those rooms.
Trunk sermon at 2 A.M. Yeah, the trunk sermon at 2 A.M.
Preached by nobody ordained. Congregation of people who don't attend anything that requires advanced registration. You got here because the bass called you, and the bass don't call everyone. This is the 3rd southern city in 2 weeks, and every southern city has its version of this sermon. But the trunk sermon has its own liturgy, and the liturgy was written in parking lots, in the gap years between what the radio was playing and what the people who needed it most were making in backyards and basements and borrowed spaces.
The trunk sermon at 2 A.M.
The preacher is the producer, the pulpit is the subwoofer, and the congregation came here the same way. Every congregation comes to every legitimate gathering by word of mouth from the right mouth. The wrong mouth doesn't have this address. The wrong mouth never had this address and has been looking for it for 30 years without finding it, because the address was never available to the wrong mouth. That the address lives in a different transmission. Cousin Jerome is holding court in the northeast corner. Jerome hasn't stopped since 11, and Jerome doesn't stop when Jerome is in it, because in it means you're on the other side of something that doesn't have a clock on the wall. You fill the pocket and the pocket carries you until the pocket decides to set you down. And at 2 a.m. the pocket is in its most generous mood. The bounce at 2 a.m. is different from the bounce at 10. At 10 you're performing for the room. At 2 you're inside the room in a way that performance can't reach. Performance requires self-consciousness, and self-consciousness requires a witness outside yourself. At 2 a.m. the witness is gone, and the body just moves, and the body moving without self-consciousness is the only honest testimony that music is capable of extracting.
The trunk sermon at 2 a.m.
This is what Memphis built and didn't register anywhere. This is what didn't make the city's marketing materials. This is what the tourism board didn't know to include, because the tourism board was never in the parking lot at 2. In the parking lot at 2.
Was never open to the tourism board.
I came up in a specific sound, and the sound I came up in was made by people who were not trying to be heard outside the radius of the people they were making it for. And the radius is the entire point. A sermon for everyone is a speech. A sermon for the people who need it, delivered in a parking lot at 2 a.m. to a congregation that arrived by word of mouth. That's something else. The trunk is still preaching. The trunk has been preaching since before the sermon had a name. It will preach after everyone here has gone home, because the preaching is in the mechanism now. The mechanism will make something for the people who know, and let the people who know bring the people who learn, and let the learning happen in the parking lot at 2. Not in any building that requires a permit, not in any space that required advanced arrangement. Just here now with the bass bouncing off the concrete. In the congregation, feeling it in their chest before they feel it in their ears.
The trunk sermon at 2 a.m.
Preached by nobody ordained, for everybody who was ordained by the sound, before the sound ever said a word about them. There's a point in this life where ordinary stops being available, not as a punishment, just as a consequence of what you've seen. And what you've seen can't be unseen, and unseen things reframe the way the ordinary looks, permanently, not temporarily. You don't get a window where it reverts. The seeing is a one-way door, and nobody who walked through it has ever successfully walked back. I remember ordinary. I was 19 and ordinary felt like the safest container available. Then somebody opened the door that looked like an ordinary door, and behind it was everything that the ordinary street doesn't reference. And I walked through it voluntarily, which means I can't claim I was taken anywhere. I chose the door, which is the most important thing to understand about everything that came after. Exit the ordinary, not the destination, just a direction. Exit the ordinary and watch ordinary become a country you don't have the passport to anymore. This doesn't happen all at once. It happens the way a language is forgotten, gradually, then suddenly. One day you go back to try to speak it, and the words don't come the same way. And the people on the other side notice that something is different about the way you're trying. I don't say that with nostalgia, and I don't say it with regret. I say it with the kind of clarity that comes from living on both sides of a line long enough to know exactly where the line is, and exactly why crossing it was irreversible. I've met men who crossed it and spent 20 years trying to pretend they hadn't, trying to maintain 1 foot in the ordinary world as insurance against the world they'd actually entered. And what I observed is that the foot in the ordinary world costs more than the ordinary world ever gave you back. The insurance policy is priced wrong from the beginning. What ordinary operates on the assumption that the official version is the complete version, that what gets acknowledged is what exists, that what's on the record is the record. I spent 20-something years learning that the record is a fraction of what actually happened, and the fraction that gets recorded is specifically selected by people who had reasons for recording that fraction and omitting the rest. The omissions are not accidents. The omissions are decisions made by people who understood what omitting those things would cost the people who needed them. Exit the ordinary, and everything you thought was the whole picture becomes obviously a partial picture. Exit the ordinary, and you start to understand why certain men move through crowds, and the crowd doesn't know what moved through them. The crowd processes the surface, and the surface is managed so that the crowd processes only what the surface allows, which is why the surface exists and why maintaining it costs what it costs. I'm not better for this life, I wanna be clear about that. Better is a moral category, and this isn't a moral story. I'm more informed, more calibrated, more aware of how things actually function versus how they present to people who have no access to the function. That's different from better, that's just more complete, and more complete comes at a price that the ordinary world doesn't charge for, because the ordinary world doesn't offer the product. The ordinary has its compensations, I don't pretend otherwise. Relationships, simplicity, sleep that comes easy. This life has a toll that the ordinary doesn't have to pay, and anyone who tells you different is selling the aesthetic without the ledger that comes with it. The ledger I've been paying from for 23 years includes things I don't mention in any room, because the mention would cost more than the thing costs, and some things you pay for twice if you're not careful about who knows you paid. Exit the ordinary, knowing the ledger, choosing it anyway, knowing the toll, paying it with full information. Exit the ordinary, that's the only way this works, because the ones who exited without knowing the ledger spent years trying to re-enter the ordinary, and ordinary had moved on while they were gone. Ordinary doesn't wait, ordinary doesn't remember holding the door for anyone. Ordinary just continues the way everything continues. That doesn't need you specifically to continue. The territory doesn't need me to explain it. The territory doesn't need my testimony for its legitimacy. The territory was here, the territory will continue. I'm just a man who walked through more doors than most, and lived long enough to know that the most important door was the first one I walked through without turning back, because the not turning back is the contract. And the contract is with the territory, not with any person in it. And the territory enforces its contracts in the only way territories know how, by outlasting everything that might argue with them. In the ordinary,
Nobody sent you an invitation. That's the first thing you need to understand about this. The invitation doesn't exist in any form that can be forwarded, photographed, or remembered afterward. You got here because someone decided you were ready to get here, and that decision was made in a room you'll never visit, by people who were watching you in situations you didn't know were auditions. This is Houston, but it ain't the Houston the highway knows. The Houston I'm talking about is behind the Houston on the exit signs. It's the Houston that opens at 1 in the morning, when the restaurants that require reservations have closed. And the people who run those restaurants have gone to the place that doesn't require a reservation, because you either have access or you don't. And access was decided long before the night. The door's on Greenbrier, set back from the street. The kind of door that looks like a side entrance to something else, because it is. It's the side entrance to something else. Something else being the accurate description of everything the city holds past midnight. When the visible world goes home, and the world that was always here just underneath it stops pretending it isn't operating. Miss Celeste Nan has been watching that door since 1991. Not working it, watching it, there's a difference. The man working the door is visible. Miss Celeste is 3 houses down in a car that's been on that block long enough that nobody notices it anymore. And Miss Celestine notices everything. And what Miss Celestine notices gets to the right people before you finish parking. The invitation nobody sent is the understanding that you already belong here. Before you walk through that door, that's the only invitation that matters in any city, in any version of this world that exists past midnight. The paper invitation is for events. This ain't an event, this is infrastructure. I came up in this world through my uncle's barbershop. Not the barbershop itself, what the barbershop was adjacent to. Uncle Ray had 6 chairs in a back room. The back room had a door to the parking lot, and the parking lot had a conversation happening every Tuesday night from 1994 forward. I swept hair until I was 15, and when I was 15, Uncle Ray stopped sending me home before the conversation started. And that was the invitation. A man not sending you home. The invitation nobody sent is the nod across the room, is the second handshake that lasts slightly longer than the first, is being asked to stay when everyone else is told the night is over, is being trusted with the information of where the continuation is. Before the continuation starts, you don't apply for this, you demonstrate over time in smaller rooms that you understand the value of the door being closed, and the night keeps track in a way that paper never could. Uncle Ray died at 72, 30 years of Tuesday nights behind him. Not one of those nights in a report anywhere. That's the testimony, that's the legacy. That's what you inherit when somebody decides you're ready for the invitation that nobody sent. Nobody sent, nobody sent, nobody sent, nobody sent.
Fur came after the protocol, not before it. I need you to understand the sequence, because the sequence is everything. A lot of men came through here wearing the outer layer, thinking the outer layer was the entry point, and got dealt with accordingly. Because they had the aesthetics without the foundation, and the foundation is what this world checks first. The foundation is invisible to people who didn't build one, which is why they look for the aesthetics instead, and why they consistently misread the room. But fur and protocol, you can't have one without the other. Fur and protocol, the coat means nothing if you don't already know the rules that earn the coat. Fur and protocol, this ain't fashion, this is architecture. The drape is just the flag. The country is what matters. I knew a man called Sterling, impeccable presentation, gator boots, cream coat, the whole visual language. Walked into situations that required more than visual language, and the visual language didn't save him, because he borrowed the aesthetic without doing the labor. The labor is invisible, that's why people skip it. They see the output and reverse engineer the wrong logic. Sterling spent 3 years in the lobby, convinced that if he dressed like the men who had access, the access would follow. And for 3 years the men with access watched Sterling, and by the 3rd year they'd seen enough to know that Sterling had the wardrobe, but not the word. And the word is what opens rooms, not the wardrobe. Protocol is this: you establish your word before you establish your wardrobe. Your word is the equity. The wardrobe is just compounding interest. A man without his word in a fur coat is a liability in expensive fabric. And liabilities don't last in this world. This world is efficient at identifying them. It takes one situation where the word gets tested, one moment where keeping the word costs something real. And either you keep it and everything you built means something, or you don't keep it and everything you built was dressing for a part you weren't actually playing. Fur and protocol, you can't have one without the other. Fur and protocol. I spent 3 years in rooms where the most powerful man was wearing nothing remarkable, because he didn't need the visual. to announce himself.
The room already knew, fur and protocol.
When you get to a certain level, the fur becomes optional.
The protocol never does.
And here's what nobody tells you about reaching that level. Protocol doesn't get easier, it gets more precise. Every year you're in this world, the tolerance for variance decreases. What was acceptable at year 3 is unacceptable at year 12. Because by year 12, the standard has had time to know you. And the standard knows exactly what you're capable of and holds you to it. I watched Charlene build her territory from a single contact on the east side of Compton, 1994. Nothing extraordinary to look at. 5 years later, she was the person other people needed to know. Not because she advertised, because she delivered. And delivering consistently, quietly, without exception. In this world is the loudest statement you can make. Charlene never owned a fur coat, I checked. Charlene owned something better than a fur coat. Charlene owned a reputation that preceded her in the room she hadn't entered yet. The loudest room I ever sat in had 4 people in it whispering, because they didn't need volume to establish consequence. Fighting is for people who haven't established consequence yet. Once the consequence is known, the silence does the work. I'm still learning to be more silent. And I was never the loudest man in any room, but there are rooms I've been in for 20 years where I'm still not the quietest. And I understand now that silence is a practice, not a state. You don't arrive at silence, you work toward it every day against the pull of wanting to be heard.
Fur and protocol.
You can't have one without the other.
Fur and protocol.
Strip the fur and what's left should be enough to still command the space. If it ain't the fur was doing work it shouldn't have to do.
Fur and protocol.
Earn the inside first and dress it however you choose. Because at that point, the outside is just expression. And expression from a solid foundation means something different than expression from an empty one. Sterling eventually understood this. It took everything Sterling had, but he understood it. And he understood it. And the understanding, even late, was the beginning of the real work. The protocol isn't written in any book I've seen. I've been looking for 20 years. It lives in the decisions made right, accumulated. And the accumulation becomes the coat, and the coat earned the right way fits differently than any coat you could buy without earning the right to wear it.
Slow money. You don't chase it, you become the thing it moves toward. Slow money is the result of slow conversation. And slow conversation is the only conversation that produces decisions that hold for more than one season. Houston understands slow and the way other cities don't. Houston has a pace that looks like stillness to outsiders, but the stillness is intentional. The stillness is the method. Other cities move fast and leave behind what they move too quickly for. Houston sits with something until the thing decides to reveal itself. And the thing, once it decides to reveal itself to Houston, stays revealed because Houston earned the reveal through patience. I sat across from a man named Beaumont in a diner on the southwest side at 2 in the morning in Beaumont, and I had the same conversation 7 separate times over the course of a year and a half. Not because either of us forgot the previous conversation, but because slow conversation builds something that can't be built in one sitting. The first conversation established that we were both serious. The second established that we both understood a risk. The third established the geography of our respective operations. By the 7th we had something operational that 20 years later is still operational and has never required a contract. Because the 7 conversations are the contract, and the 7 conversations live in 2 memories, not in any document. Slow money, slower conversation. Everything worth building takes longer than you're comfortable with. Slow money, slower conversation. The people who hurry this part spend the rest of the arrangement paying for the hurry with pride. problems that patience would have prevented. Beaumont died of natural causes in 2021. 74 years old in his own bed, which in this world is considered a long and successful life. And the thing Beaumont and I built together in 7 conversations was already 20 years old when Beaumont died. And continued past his dying, because Beaumont had taken the same approach with 3 other people who were still here when he wasn't. And the thing continued in their hands the way Beaumont knew it would, because Beaumont's whole philosophy was build it so it doesn't need you to survive you. That's the slow money philosophy at its core. Don't build a thing that needs you to run it. Build a thing that your absence doesn't stop. And the only way to build that kind of thing is through conversation so thorough that the people who continue it understand it as well as you do, which takes more than 7 conversations. 7 conversations is just the beginning. Slow money, slower conversation. The fastest I ever moved cost me 18 months of correction and relationship repair. And I was relatively fast for this world, which means relatively fast in this world is still much slower than the world outside thinks is reasonable. And the world outside is wrong about what's reasonable. In the same way that the world outside is wrong about most things that require patience to understand. Beaumont's last lesson to me before the last year of his life was to sit with something for as long as it needed to be sat with, and never apologize for the sitting, because the sitting is the work, and most people are unable to do the work, which is why most people don't have access to what the work produces. The appointment wasn't on any calendar I know about, but everybody in the room arrived on time, because that's what the Gothic Appointment means. You know it's coming without being told the date. You feel it in the weeks before, like the air pressure changes off the Mississippi before the storm that doesn't make the news. There is a specific quality to the air in Memphis when something is about to be decided. The air gets heavier, not lighter, and the people who've been here long enough stop what they're doing and wait. Every territory has one, the moment where the lines get drawn for real, not implied, not suggested in coded language, but drawn. And once they're drawn, the map is fixed until something large enough moves them, and not many things are large enough. Have seen 3 territories consolidate in my lifetime. Have seen 2 territories fracture. Not one of those events was announced. Not one of them had a visible beginning. They all had a Wednesday. That was the last Wednesday of the way things were. And nobody knew it was the last Wednesday until Thursday confirmed it. The Gothic Appointment came from my predecessor on a Wednesday in November 1991. 3 men in a room on Poplar Avenue. No witnesses that survived as witnesses. And when Thursday arrived, the territory had new management. No announcement, no transition document. Just a Thursday that had a different shape than the Wednesday. The man ran the 3 blocks off Beale for 16 years before that Thursday. Wasn't running anything by Friday morning. The territory absorbed what he built and kept operating without skipping a beat, because the territory doesn't grieve for its operators. It just continues. This is what I mean when I say Memphis is Gothic. Gothic isn't the style of the furniture. Gothic is the understanding that consequence has its own timetable and its own aesthetics, and both are beyond your control once you've done the thing that earned the consequence. The Gothic is the knowledge that the reckoning doesn't operate on your schedule. It operates on the territory schedule, and the territory is patient in a way that humans are not. I didn't schedule the appointment. The appointment found its own date, because that's how this works. The territory decides, not you, not me, not the man in the cream coat from Compton. The territory is older than all of us combined, and it keeps its own records in a language that only shows up when the moment requires it. The record isn't anywhere you can read it until it's being read to you. And by then, Reading it is just confirmation of what has already been executed. The Gothic Appointment is not a warning. Warnings are for people who still have room to change their behavior. This is a statement of fact about what already happened, somewhere in the timeline that we don't have access to yet, but will.
The Gothic Appointment is always past tense,
Even when it hasn't occurred yet, because certain things are already determined by the choices that were already made. The appointment was made the moment you stepped wrong. You just don't know what moment that was until the appointment arrives to tell you.
I stood outside that room on Poplar Avenue 20 years after the Wednesday that changed everything. And the room still carried it. The walls absorbed consequence. The floors of these old Memphis buildings hold memory in the wood grain. You walk on it and something cellular recognizes it. Something below language knows what this floor saw and adjusts accordingly. I stood in the room for 11 minutes and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that the room hadn't already said to itself 1,000 times in the 20 years since the appointment was kept. That's the Gothic Appointment, that's always been the Gothic Appointment. You think you're moving through time, but in certain rooms in the city, you're moving through every version of that room simultaneously. The 1991 Wednesday and the present Wednesday, and the Wednesday that hasn't come yet, all occupying the same square footage. The appointment is not linear. It lives at every point on the timeline at once, which is why you can feel it coming, and why, once you felt it coming, you already know you won't be able to stop it. I'm not afraid of the appointment. I made peace with the appointment the first year I understood the territory, because understanding the territory means understanding. But the territory doesn't bend for individuals, it bends for nothing. It absorbs everything and continues. The Gothic Appointment is the territory's way of reminding you that you're a tenant, not a landlord. Even the ones who act like landlords eventually learn the same lesson, the same Wednesday way.